So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Bernadette Jiwa, who is an old friend of the podcast. Hi, Bernadette. How are you doing?
It's good to chat to you again. How are you doing?
I'm very well. So, like I was saying earlier, it's about 4 years almost to the date that we first spoke about a previous book of yours. But now you've got a new book out called Hunch, which is all very exciting. But before we get into the book, for the benefit of our listeners and readers that don't know about you, can you tell us a little bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
I'm Bernadette Jiwa. I'm a business advisor and an author, and I help businesses big and small to design, build, and grow businesses they're proud of.
Perfect. Now, let's get to this new book because it's called Hunch. Turn your everyday insights into the next big thing. Now, so tell me a little bit about the book and how it came about and who's it for, what's its purpose, what it kind of like compelled you to write it.
Well, as you know, the work that I do with people is all about helping them to tell their story in a compelling way and to unpack it and to work out how their brand is, can be magnetic, how it's a map and a mirror also for them. And what I was finding was with the advent of big data, people were losing faith in their ability and their judgment to make good decisions and make good calls about their ideas, which they previously were not. So that was interesting to me. And as I began to dig deeper and think about the idea, what I wanted to reflect back to people was the people that we really admire, the entrepreneurs that we hold up as these great examples, never had the big data we had, a lot of them, and they found data in other places. Yeah. And thirdly, they learn to trust their gut and go. They don't have all the information necessary because you never do.
Yeah. So interestingly, so I spoke to the CMO of Mozilla, a fine gentleman called Yasha Jacobs Wolf. It's a splendid name, and he had a very interesting point of view. He turned around and he said, "I think big data is making marketeers and many other people." He said, "I think it's just making them lazy." I mean, would you agree with that?
I think we're using it as a crutch, and also the thing is, big data almost gives you this deniability, doesn't it? It wasn't the data it wasn't me that was wrong. It was the data. So we can fall back on that if we need to. Instead of taking some responsibility and instead of exercising some judgment and thinking about where else the data is. Data isn't just something that you plot in a spreadsheet. And if you're just paying attention to the things you could put on a spreadsheet, then when are you spending time face to face with the people you hope will love your products?
Sure. It's funny because you remind me of a story, and this is probably one of my favorite stories of recent months, and it was told to me by a colleague of mine, and it propelled me to kind of spin it into a sort of a little kind of story and article. And the story that I wrote was that, we talk about big data and analytics and all this big new computing kind of power, new technology, and part of that, and particularly within that rather, is artificial intelligence. And one of the tools within that is things I think called neural networks, which I thought, okay, that's interesting. And when I looked into it, its full name is artificial neural networks, so ANNs. So then I thought to myself, so if there's such a thing as an artificial neural network, there must be such a thing as a real or a biological neural network. And it struck me that, and that's sort of the people around us. Whether it's our customers, our suppliers, our colleagues, kind of whoever. And it was interesting because he told me a story about a project that was getting done in a big financial services institution, and they brought in a big data and analytics team who wanted to identify all the the main problems that customers had, and they gathered all the data, and then they went away and they sat kind of hunched over their computers, in a room for about 6 weeks crunching the numbers. And then at the same time, some bright spark got together about 10, 15 different frontline employees, put them in a room, told the managers to bugger off, gave them teas, coffees, and a bunch of donuts, and said, right, can tell us what the top 10 customer problems are. And in 30 minutes, they identified the top 10 problems. 6 weeks later, the data analytics kind of team came back, only to confirm that the frontline employees were 80% correct.
That is so good. I wish I'd had that story from my book.
I told that story like a big data analytics conference, and I said my question was going to be is like, are you willing to spend, a few pounds or euros on teas and coffees and 30 minutes of your time to be 80% correct? Or are you willing to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds and hundreds, if not thousands, of man hours and woman hours to get it absolutely kind of right, to wait to get to that almost certainty, which is probably not that certain anyway? And
can I tell you my big data story?
Oh, of course. I love these stories.
Which also isn't in the book. Just before, this is a political story, but just before the US presidential election, my husband and I were in New York on business. He was there at the Behavior Summit, where people like Nate Silver and the great and the good were speaking. And obviously the topic of the election came up. And as we all know, the data was pointing in the direction that Hillary was going to win for certain. Yeah. And nobody doubted it. We were walking around by the Rockefeller Center the next day, and there was a guy there selling hats to tourists. They happened to be beanies with the two candidates' names emblazoned on them. And he was a great salesman. He managed to stop us and get us chatting. And he said, Trump's going to win this election. And we looked at him as though he was a lunatic. And he said, I can't keep stock of these Trump hats. They're selling like hotcakes. And what that pointed to for us was that he was finding the data and the stories, listening to the common man on the street, looking into his eyes and seeing the truth of what people won't always tell you in a survey.
So, I mean, in amongst all this kind of big data analytics sort of stuff and the idea about sort of finding the real kind of meaning, I mean, is there something else kind of going on with kind of business and management? I mean, is it that we're getting too stuck indoors and are not doing that sort of actually management by walking about type of idea?
We're losing the skill of noticing.
Right.
Because we've got the data, and B, we've got the distraction on the flip side of that.
Right.
Just legions of stuff coming at us every day. We're trying to optimize ourselves to the max. We are always, we'll always listen to your podcast in the car on the way to work because, it's the efficient way to do things.
Sure.
We don't build in any reflection time into our day. We're not noticing what's going on around us. I often wonder what Steve Jobs would do if he came down now. Would he be aghast when he sees people walking along with their their faces in their phone bumping into walls and other people in the street and not looking up? Because he built his business, he built Apple on understanding what it is that people inherently deeply wanted, this unmet need in them.
So what happens if we actually, if we stop listening to or acting on our kind of, it's actually, before I get to that, when you say a hunch, is that just like this, is it just like an idea? Is it a feeling? What is it? What is a hunch?
Well, it's insight and foresight. So it's not just crystal ball gazing. It's not just, which numbers are going to come up in the lottery this weekend based on nothing. It's informed by something, and what it's informed by is noticing patterns, and with practice, it's a practice. Scientists do it all the time. What's interesting, I think, is that intuition has gotten a bad rap because of the great work of people like Daniel Kahneman. in the field of behavioral economics,
Yeah.
where the scientists have discovered that when it comes to making decisions, our intuition can be quite flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side of that, even they will admit that intuition can be also marvelous.
Mm-hmm.
What's entertaining when you think about it is, where do they start? Where does a scientist start? They start with some kind of hypothesis that isn't proven. Their job is to go and find the proof. So even scientists whose job it is to give us the proof start with hunches.
Right.
And when I was doing the research for the book, I found so many great quotes from people like Einstein and people whose job it was to give us proofs, and they all talk about intuition and making intuitive leaps. Stephen Hawking is another one who you would think of as a super rational person, and he talks about intuition all the time.
And what's in danger of happening if we stop? I mean, if we sort of, I mean, because it feels like, I mean, I sort of agree with you that everybody's talking about big data, analytics. I find it quite scary that we started talking about databases, and then now we've got then it was data warehouses, and now we start talking about data lakes, and I think we're going to get to seas, and then oceans, and then planets. It's all going to be quite frightening, But my sense is that we're sort of moving away from that sort of connected, intuitive, relying on ourselves way of, I mean, almost personal and connected way of managing and understanding things and trusting ourselves, I guess.
I agree with you. And also cultivating certain skills and attributes in ourselves that enable us to do that. The three... When I was researching and saying, okay, what is it that people like Steve Jobs, but not just Steve Jobs? The book is full of lots of examples of small businesses, because I didn't want to just rely on the classic Uber, Airbnb, and Apple examples.
Sure.
And what I found was that there are certain qualities that people who are very entrepreneurs actually have, and that's curiosity, empathy, and imagination. That trifecta is something we can all cultivate in ourselves. These are not special skills reserved for someone like an Elon Musk or a Silicon Valley savant.
Yeah,
and my favorite,
the hero entrepreneur, as it were.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things, if just lastly, the last thing we're going to say about Steve Jobs, one of my favorite things that he said was, everything around you that you call life was made up by people who are no smarter than you. And I think we've forgotten that.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that kind of hunches, it's not just this innate ability, it can be learned, and and so can you give us to bring it to life, give us a couple, you talk about there's not just the hero brands and entrepreneurs. Can you give us a couple of examples of companies of people that have used these kind of hunches to achieve big breakthroughs, and sort of how they've gone about it, just to sort of bring it to life a little bit? Because I think otherwise that people think, oh, it's a hunch, but then they sort of don't know what it is. Let's kind of ground it in reality in many ways.
So there was a Stanford graduate called Debbie Sterling, and she happens to have gone to Stanford, but she could have gone anywhere. She was an engineer, and when she was growing up, she played with girls' toys. And when she got to Stanford, she found engineering quite challenging. In fact, she didn't really know that she actually came to it because she was good at maths, and one of her teachers recommended her to pursue it as a career. And when she got there, she obviously noticed she was in the minority and began to wonder why that was, and made the connection between, hang on a second, girls stopped playing with construction toys at a very early age.
Yes.
And why is that? And went to look for the evidence. And in the toy industry also noticed that there weren't a lot of construction toys for girls. And when confronted with the people in the toy industry, they said to her, well, you can't fight nature. Girls are just not interested in this stuff, and that's why we don't make it.
Right.
She made the connection between girls' superior language skills and the idea that if she gave girls a story about why they were constructing something, and it was wrapped around a story, that they would actually maintain their interest in building. So she created a toy called Goldie Blocks, where she wrote a story of this engineer who was Goldie, who went along creating this world with her friends and solving engineering problems. And that toy has gone on to be Toy of the Year, phenomenal success. And what she is hoping to do is not just put another plastic product into the world, but she's actually hoping to upskill girls in spatial awareness and redress that balance so that we've got more female engineers in the world.
Fantastic.
That's one.
Yeah. Do you have another one ready to share?
I do.
Oh, perfect.
Dollar Shave Club, which you might know about. They were a business that launched in 2012, I think. And what these guys, through understanding intimately what it's like to have terrible blunt razors that cost you a lot of money, that you're paying for, confusing, am I buying 3 blades, quattro, what the heck should I be buying? What's going to get me the best shave? You don't know what you're buying. It's inconvenient to go and buy them anywhere. Whenever you often go and get your blades out and your razor's blunt and you cut yourself. So what they did was they created a product where they said, look, we're going to strip away, we're going to give you a quality product, we're going to make it a subscription product so that we deliver to you every X number of weeks, direct to you, and we're not paying, as they quite cleverly pointed out in their video. I'd encourage people to watch it when they launched, which is on their website, Dollar Shave Club. We're not paying Roger Federer the $19 in sponsorship, so you'll get your razors cheaper from us, but the quality won't be compromised.
Right.
And they just sold to Unilever because so many men embraced their products because they just hit the nail on the head, that unmet need. They solved a problem, and they didn't have. They were just curious, empathetic, imaginative couple of guys who went for it.
Perfect. So if somebody's listening to this, I mean, they're an exec, they're a leader, they're an entrepreneur, and they're listening to this podcast and they're thinking about this, they get the feeling. They're like going, we're not trusting our hunches enough, but I want to get better at that. I want to start developing my own ability to both identify and act on my own hunches. I mean, what should they be doing first? What's the first sort of sets of things that they should be doing? Because this is it's like a habit, right? It's like they've got to develop it's like going into training. It's like hunch training. I mean, so what should they be doing first? Where should they start? Number
1, get rid of your phone, turn it off at certain times of day.
Right.
That's number 1. Don't always be multitasking. Find, single task. Use your commute to not listen to the radio or read the newspaper or look through your LinkedIn feed. Just sit quietly with your own thoughts and build in some reflection time into your day and get into the habit of noticing what's going on around you. Take out your earbuds. Things that you probably used to do 10 years ago before you had a smartphone.
Sure.
And you were probably a lot more creative.
Sit and be quiet.
And ask questions. When we were 3, we were so good at that, asking questions.
Yeah.
And as we get older, we get afraid of being wrong because we know that knowledge is currency, because it pays to get all the right answers on the test, because the people who do that get the best grades, go to the best universities, get the best jobs, have the best lives. So we don't like being wrong. And then get over that fear of uncertainty and recognize that you will be wrong sometimes, and that's okay. It's part of the creative process.
Perfect. And so before I ask you another my couple of questions that I always ask towards the end of these interviews, is there anything that you think that you'd like to point out from the book that we've kind of missed out, sort of highlight around this, the idea of nudges and why it's essential we cultivate this kind of this habit again, and we don't ignore it, and because it's essential for our own progress and growth and development and things. I mean, is there anything that we've missed out?
Just that the next big thing doesn't have to be something that everybody's going to adopt. The next big thing, you can be changing a tiny corner of the world. It doesn't have to be $1 billion unicorn brand that you're building. It can be something small, and it's something that's open to everybody, as we have already pointed out.
Perfect. So that brings me to my last couple of questions, Bernadette. And so the first one is based around, it's a bit of a selfish one. It's sort of my own piece of market research. So I wrote a book last year, it came out, called How to Wow. And what I've been doing since its publication is asking everybody I've spoken to on the podcast for their own perspective on what is sort of wow service or experience to you. And so I'd be really interested to get your take on that.
Wow to me is the tiny things. It's in the details. It's in the tiny details. It's in noticing that somebody hasn't got something on their plate and fixing that. It's being, one example that I have is and it doesn't seem like a wow, but it is a wow these days. In a cafe, the coffee machine wasn't working one morning, and a cafe we go to all the time, and they gave us a free drink for the next time. They didn't have to. So it's doing something small that you don't have to do. Right.
Perfect. And that then brings me to my final question. I always ask at the end of these interviews and the question is this. Bernadette, is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Can I shamelessly plug my friend and colleague Seth Godin's blog? I'm sure a lot of your listeners read Seth's blog, but I would like to shamelessly plug that.
Perfect. Well,
because it's been an amazing resource to me over the years, and he is one of the most, he is the most insightful, generous person I know.
Well, Bernadette, that's brilliant. And what I will do is I will shamelessly plug your book, because I thought it was a great read. I'm a fan of Seth's work as well. But I just want to say, first of all, great to talk to you again. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for sharing your time and insights with us today. It's been a pleasure.
It was great to chat to you, and congratulations on your book too.
Thank you very much.